Imagine a community so economically powerful that money didn't just circulate, it multiplied. Every dollar spent would return again and again, fueling new businesses, new jobs, and growing independence. In the early 1900s, the Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma, built something incredibly close to that reality. It became a thriving black business hub so successful that it earned the name Black Wall Street. But in 1921, that prosperity was violently destroyed during the Tulsa Race Massacre. Yet economists still ask a haunting question: what if Greenwood had never been destroyed? If its banks, businesses, and real estate had been allowed to grow for a full century, some estimates suggest the community could be worth more than $1 trillion today. Sounds almost unreal, but the logic behind it becomes clearer once you understand how Greenwood actually functioned. A dollar spent in one store would often become rent paid to a black landlord, who might hire a black contractor, who would then spend money at a black restaurant. That same dollar could circulate multiple times before leaving the district. Economists describe this as a high-circulation local economy, a system where internal spending fuels continuous growth instead of leaking outward. In simple terms, Greenwood wasn't just earning money. It was recycling wealth. And by 1921, this system had become so strong that outsiders began comparing it to Wall Street itself. That comparison is where the name Black Wall Street was born. To understand the scale of what Greenwood could have become, we need to look at what it actually was before 1921. This was not a struggling neighborhood. It was a thriving economic engine. Brick buildings lined the streets. Storefronts were filled with goods. Restaurants stayed busy late into the night. On weekends, theaters and entertainment halls were packed. More than 100 black-owned businesses operated in nearly every sector of daily life, including grocery stores, pharmacies, hotels, restaurants, clothing shops, salons, law offices, insurance agencies, and printing companies. Even media existed within Greenwood. The Tulsa Star newspaper reported local news and advocated for community advancement. Professional services were also present. Doctors, lawyers, dentists, teachers, and real estate agents all worked within the district. That level of self-sufficiency was extremely rare in early 20th century America. One of the most iconic landmarks was the Stratford Hotel, considered one of the largest and most luxurious black-owned hotels in the United States at the time. But the real strength of Greenwood wasn't just what existed, it was how it functioned. Money moved in continuous cycles inside the community. A purchase at a grocery store might become wages for workers, rent for property owners, or income for service providers, all staying within Greenwood's ecosystem. This created what economists call local economic velocity, a key driver of wealth accumulation. Unlike most communities where money quickly flows out to external corporations, Greenwood kept money circulating internally for longer periods, strengthening every business in the chain. That's why observers compared it to Wall Street, not because it was identical, but because it was financially alive in a similar way, dense, active, and constantly growing. And beneath that activity, something very important was building. Even by conservative estimates, Greenwood held millions of dollars in property and business value in 1921. Adjusted for inflation, that represents tens of millions in today's terms. But that figure only reflects what existed at a single moment in time. It does not reflect growth over decades. It does not include reinvestment. And it does not include generational expansion. Because when businesses survive, they don't stay the same, they scale. 3 minutes and 10 seconds. A store becomes a chain. A contractor becomes a construction company. A bank becomes a financial institution. And when many businesses grow together inside one ecosystem, the effects multiply rapidly. We can already see this pattern in modern economic centers. Small entrepreneurial clusters have evolved into massive global hubs like Silicon Valley, which began as a small network of startups before becoming one of the most valuable regions in the world. Greenwood was already showing early signs of that same trajectory. It had entrepreneurs, professional services, property ownership, internal investment networks, and strong community-driven commerce. In other words, it already had the foundation of a self-sustaining economic engine. At the core of long-term wealth creation is one powerful force: compound growth. This is the principle that allows money to grow exponentially over time as gains generate new gains. In modern markets, the S&P 500 has historically returned around 10% annually over long periods. That may sound modest, but over decades, it becomes staggering. Even a small amount of money can grow more than 1,000 times over a century when consistently compounded. Now apply that principle to Greenwood's economy. If we conservatively estimate that the district held around $2 million in combined assets in 1921, and those assets grew at an average 10% annual rate over 100 years, the result would exceed $27 billion today. But that is only a passive scenario. Real economies do not remain static. Businesses expand. Profits are reinvested. New companies are created. Property is developed. And when reinvestment enters the system, growth becomes exponential rather than linear. 5 minutes and 10 seconds. Each business feeds the next, creating a network of interconnected economic growth. Real estate in such environments behaves differently. As demand rises, land value accelerates. As businesses grow, demand increases further. Over time, this creates a powerful cycle of appreciation. In modern cities, prime commercial land can be worth tens of millions per acre. Now imagine that level of appreciation applied across 36 fully developed blocks over 100 years. The result could easily reach tens of billions of dollars in real estate value alone, especially if the district evolved into a high-density commercial hub with offices, hotels, and residential towers. But even that still does not reach trillion-dollar territory. To understand that scale, we must examine the third and most powerful force in the system, banking. When a community controls its own financial institutions, money does not just circulate, it multiplies. And in Greenwood, early forms of local financial cooperation were already developing before 1921. Deposits from residents were reinvested into local businesses. Loans helped entrepreneurs expand. Profits returned to the banking system, increasing available capital for further lending. This is known as the banking multiplier effect. Banks do not simply hold money, they expand it through lending cycles that generate new economic activity. When combined with business growth and real estate expansion, banking becomes the central engine that accelerates everything else. If Greenwood had continued developing its financial institutions over the course of a century, it could have created a fully integrated economic system. Businesses would grow. Banks would finance expansion. Real estate would appreciate. Profits would circulate back into investment. Each part of the system would reinforce the others. This is how major financial centers are built, not through one sector, but through the interaction of all three working together over time. When economists combine these forces, compound growth, business expansion, real estate appreciation, and banking multiplication, the long-term projections become extremely large. Under conservative assumptions, Greenwood's century-long economic output could realistically reach hundreds of billions of dollars. Under more aggressive but still plausible growth conditions, where businesses scale nationally and financial institutions expand regionally, the valuation could extend into the trillions. But beyond the numbers, the real meaning of Greenwood lies somewhere deeper. It represents what happens when economic potential is built, structured, and sustained, but then suddenly interrupted. Because wealth is not only what exists in one moment, it is what continues to grow across generations. Greenwood had already built the foundation for that kind of long-term growth: ownership, entrepreneurship, reinvestment, and community-driven finance. In many ways, it was not a failed experiment in economics. It was an unfinished one. A system that was actively working, actively growing, and actively proving what economic independence could look like under extremely difficult conditions. And that is why its story continues to be studied today, not only as history, but as a glimpse of what might have been possible if time had been allowed to do its work.